Michael, it seems like only this time yesterday you're on the show, but there we go. Lots of royal news for us to go at. Right, loads of people, Michael, loads of people saying this is really, really weak from Buckingham Palace. They've caved into woke cancel culture. Your views?
This apology is entirely in keeping with Lady Susan's sense of duty and decency. I knew her for several years when I was going around the world in the train of the late Queen. And Lady Susan was always pleasant, kind, courteous and welcoming to people in all sorts of situations and all sorts of people. Now, she's 83. She's a widow. She served Her Majesty the Queen for 63 years in an honorary position. That means she wasn't paid. And she was the head girl and she did the job terribly well. But as you know, Patrick, racism is the toxic issue of the age. And obviously, she's moved quickly to distance the royal family.
She has. And actually, I think you make a really fascinating point there, Michael. It's one echoed by a chap called Stephen in the inbox, who actually just said, I think that if you look at Lady Susan, she's behaved with great generosity and integrity all the way, both in her career and now. And in particular, I applaud her meeting with Miss Fulani. If she had not, we'd have never heard the end of it. Is this actually an example of Lady Susan Hussey here doing almost her final duty, despite the fact that she probably feels absolutely eaten alive and maybe thrown to the wolves? She thought, I can take the heat off the royals here by meeting with this lady, apologising to her and promising to go away and learn from the situation. Is this her sense of duty shining through now?
Yes, you make an excellent point. Noblesse oblige, it used to be called. The problem is, you see, racism, it's an easy allegation to make, and it's almost impossible to refute because you have to prove a negative. Now, we're almost reverting to 17th century Massachusetts, where excitable teenage girls were able to point at old women and say, she's a witch, and innocent old ladies were hanged or pressed to death by having stones placed upon their chests. Now you only have to say, she's a racist, and denounce her on social media, and the rest of that woman's life has a cloud hanging over it. I hope it's not a deep cloud for Lady Susan Hussey, because I think she's a decent person. But that's what we've got to, and what we need is Arthur Miller, where is he now, to write a new play, a follow-up to The Crucible, about that sort of witch-finding. You mentioned witch hunts earlier in another context.
Yes.
It's what we have now.
Michael, I've got to ask you about this. Now, I wasn't there. You weren't there. We weren't there when this incident took place. I was there for the aftermath of it, though. I was there for all of the media reports about Ngozi Fulani. I was there to witness her and her daughter, I believe, actually, or head of operations, as I think she was calling her at the time, which I thought was quite funny, doing the media rounds and just being fawned over by the press. And one thing that I am concerned about is the palace straight away either gave old Susan Hussey the heave-ho, as it were. She says that she walked. She may well have been pushed. There appears to be a lot less of the reporting about what I would regard as pretty serious allegations relating to Ngozi Fulani's charity Sister Space. The Charity Commission is certainly interested in various different allegations. Some of these allegations include the misappropriation of funds, or where did this funding come from and why did they manage to actually get hold of some of this funding? Were they a bit fruity about their client base? And actually who was employed by this company in their accounting? For example, their accounting. These are just allegations. It's very important to say, and it is entirely up for the Charity Commission to decide whether or not they want to take a closer look at this. But in light of this, what message does this send out from our royal family, that someone can go and point the finger at an old lady and say, I think she was being racist? We get very much one side of the story, and then the palace is fine for this lady to apologise to Ngozi Fulani, despite the fact that, well, let's be honest, there are serious question marks over her character.
Well, I can't speak to that, and I don't know nothing about these allegations, and I'm sure that the truth will emerge eventually. But what I am sure of, and I saw Lady Susan in many different situations, I'm sure there was no malice intended. She didn't mean to offend this woman. As I understand it, everybody was wearing name tags. And that's how this lady knew she was speaking to Lady Susan. And I'm quite sure, well, I suspect that she may have seen her name and said, well, that's an interesting name. And then the conversation ensued. I think the problem we have now, if all conversations are going to be reduced to pleasantries and platitudes, it's going to be a rather boring world. One thing that Lady Susan might have learned from the Queen after all those years, the Queen had a favourite opening gambit with people, which people couldn't take offence from, and she would always say, "Have you come far?"
Yeah, have you come far? Well, but the problem is, though, that even that might be taken offence, because you can see how that could be spun, wouldn't it? Have you come far, as a question, and then the response is, well, why do you think I would have come far? Oh, well, I just don't know. I don't know where you're from. Well, where do you think I'm from? And it's, if you really want to, you can make a big deal out of it. And I'm absolutely livid about this stuff, as if that isn't shining through already. And it's all very well and good, Miss Fulani saying, well, I accept that no malice was involved. I've got question marks as to whether or not malice was involved in Ngozi Fulani's response to it all. Your views?
Well, perhaps you ought to ask her in and quiz her on this. But I suppose there are people who go around the world anxious already or willing to be offended. I mean, you and I, Patrick, we've been insulted by experts over the years. I don't think we've got
and rightly so a lot of the time. Rightly so. I understand. I deserve to be harangued on numerous occasions. But carry on, yes.
No, well, I mean, we don't get terribly upset about it. I think you have to have a bit of a thick skin. I mean, it's the rough and tumble of life, of conversation. I mean, I worked at the BBC. Some of the conversations I heard there, it would curl your hair. But people got on with it. It was part of the small change of life. If we are all going to have to guard every single word we say, it's going to make a slightly less interesting world, Patrick.